In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America. Welcome to a special edition of the Corporate Couch. These episodes will be more of a love seat that focuses on one topic and will run 15 to 30 minutes. For each special edition episode, you will hear from one or more outstanding leaders sharing their expertise on the most important challenges in corporate America today. Welcome to a special edition of the Corporate Couch today. Very excited because this is going to be a whole new special edition where it's the book edition. And my co-host today is Sean Kincaid, the founder and owner of Aspire Business Development. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
Sean is known locally in Kansas City. He used to do a book review, networking event, and very well sought after in terms of people that were invited and the books. And so I think he's done like 45 books or 50 books. So yeah, so excited to have him. Today's book is Adam Grant's Give and Take, Why Helping Others Drives Our Success. And I love Adam Grant, and I just recently read Give and Take based on a recommendation by Chelsea Lobb, a local culture consultant specializing in the Enneagram. So, Sean, how did you get involved in this book, or who recommended it, or how did it come into your sphere of realm of reality?
Actually, that's a great question, because I don't know. I basically ended up reading it, I think, shortly before it came out.
Yeah.
And of course, my dogs are going crazy right now, so hopefully that's not coming
It's
through.
all good. Tim Ferriss can have Molly, his dog, barking, and he's we can have your dog. It was. Yeah, I mean, it's published in April 2013, so it has been.
So I think what happened was it kind of made a splash when it came out, and at the time, I was 5 or 6 years into my business, but a lot of these books that I've ended up reviewing and talking about and working with was either because I had clients that were struggling with things, or I was trying to figure things out for myself. And this one kind of fell into that category because I would tie it into, even though it's about, give and take and reciprocity styles. Ultimately, for me, it ties into how I look at networking and how I look at sales, and kind of almost the bigger picture mindset of what it takes to be the kind of person that I wanted to be in the business world.
Right.
So that's, it all kind of brought a bunch of different things together for me. And I think that's what kind of resonated when I picked it up the first time.
Well, yeah, and I think for you and I mean, I think we would both be categorized as givers, and that's how Chelsea brought it up to me, because we were having coffee, and I was, and I love to help people, but I was kind of getting not tired, but like I would come out of a meeting, I'd say, "Oh, I'll give you these 6 people introductions," and the person wouldn't even ask me how they could help me, which is fine. I mean, I'm not looking for, I'm not matching. The matchers, it's givers, takers, and matchers. So matchers are quid pro quo. You give me something, I give you something. And that's where she started talking about the book, and, Adam Rifkin, who's an unbelievable giver, a software founder.
Almost legendary, right?
It's Silicon Valley. He's written, well, this was at the time the book was written, 265 LinkedIn recommendations for people, and started this giving club basically.
Right.
And he has this 5-minute rule, if you can do something for somebody in 5 minutes or less, just do it. So
Yeah.
that
Well, and yeah, and that all kind of ties into, you start your own business. So I was in the corporate world prior to this, and at least my experience in the corporate world, because I wasn't in sales, I didn't really do much networking. I mean, yeah, I networked within the companies I was in, but it's not the same thing, and it wasn't, the kind of networking you need to be successful as an entrepreneur or a small business owner. And so for me, the whole concept of, to your point, you get out there, you meet a lot of people, and I can't tell you the number of meetings I've had where at the end of it, I think, okay, there's an hour of my life I'm never going to get back. And it is, it's wears on you. But I think when you start looking at it as, look, my job isn't to figure out how they can help me, because that ends up not working well. My job is to figure out how can I help other people and trust to the idea that, good things will come from that. And maybe that means that good things come back to me. Great. Maybe it means good things happen to somebody else. That's okay too. But I would rather see myself as somebody that's trying to add value to the world, as opposed to what can I extract from the world.
right.
And so, that's how this really came into place for me, was for him to have a data backed framework of kind of how all this worked. And then to be able to go on to prove that, there are giver takers and matchers are these reciprocity styles. And that, oh, by the way, he did a lot of studies that showed who was most successful. And, kind of the twist, spoiler alert for those who haven't read it, but, the givers are the least successful, but in a surprising twist, the givers are also the most successful.
Yeah.
At first blush, you read that or you hear that and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But when you kind of peel it back, it does. We all know people that are what he describes as the selfless givers, that just are basically, they get walked over by everybody. They are willing to do all the extra work. They're willing to, and they don't ask for anything in return. And no surprise, they end up not being terribly successful. They're great people,
Yeah.
but
And they get taken advantage of by the takers,
right,
usually.
and probably by everybody else
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Just because they, I have a sister-in-law that falls into this category. She will do anything for anyone, and therefore people ask her to do stuff all the time, and she does. And ultimately, I think it ends up causing burnout and lots of other challenges with that. But then the other kind of giving is what you were referring to, that what can I do in 5 minutes to help somebody out? How can I go to a meeting with somebody and add value to their life? That kind of thing. And it makes sense that if you can establish yourself that way and you're helping people in a genuine way, I think it all has to be genuine, that really leads to a lot of good outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, and you're not expecting anything in return, right? And I think that was a big aha for me in terms of I think he called it the otherish
Yeah.
uh, type of giver,
Givers.
where you
Yeah.
both have your own self interest in mind as well as the other person's.
Yeah.
So, and it's not like it's a matcher, but it's like you need to make sure you're achieving your goals and you have your intent in mind and focus on the things that bring you joy in your giving. And and I like that. And the other thing I took out of the book in terms of the giving was it's better to chunk your giving
Mm.
versus doing something every day. And
Right.
I always say to myself, I'm having, whatever, 3 to 7 coffee meetings a week. And, you times that by 4 to 5 introductions, you're talking, 35 up to 35 introductions possibly. And, they're on my list. I've actually, and I eventually get to them all, and if I haven't for people, I'm working on them. Uh, but I've decided after reading that book, it's like Giving Friday. I'm gonna do my introductions to people on that I've promised
Well,
on
that's a good
Friday.
idea. Right.
What I loved about it is, it's the kind of the nice people finish first
Right.
mentality. because again, you worked in Accenture, and I don't know what the culture was there, but we both worked at Sprint PCS,
Right.
and I worked at Sprint, the mothership before Sprint PCS, the long distance, when there were cords on phones and we had to pay per minute. Uh,
Careful, you're dating yourself.
no, I did not know Alexander Graham Bell, but anyhow. So yeah, I mean, it was a very not cutthroat culture, but I mean, it's very type A personalities walking around there, and if you were nice, it was almost like you. There were a lot of takers,
Right,
you know.
right. Well, and I think a lot of corporate environments, probably not all of them, but at least a lot of them that I have seen, either firsthand or secondhand, that's pretty typical. I mean, people are trying to move their way up the ladder, and there is a kind of built-in assumption of, well, I can't let you win because that keeps me from winning, and it's this scarcity mindset thing that I think is kind of built in. And so for me, back to when I first found this book, I was probably looking for maybe some justification on, hey, how can I be a better person and still win? And so
Right,
this was a nice, validation of that. And I think the other thing that this tied in for me was just the concept of that abundance mindset
right,
is a real thing. I mean, it
right.
is you can actually be successful in business with an abundance mindset of, hey, there's enough to go around for everybody. Let's try to help each other win.
Yeah,
And that was very freeing, I think.
I can't remember which story was first because you had a bunch of giver stories, but that
Right.
David Hornick, the venture capitalist,
Yeah.
he's he big giver. Like he meets another soccer dad who needs money for his company, so he gives a pitch, no pressure, tells the guy to go out and look at other VCs for funding, and the person, the founder, goes to another VC because he thought David is not going to push me.
Right.
Like he's going to be soft. But over time, he saw the value. He goes, I don't know if he ended up using him or he did some
He did. He
underwriting for
brought him
that
onto his
company.
board, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brought him onto his board, did some underwriting, and then referred him to two other entrepreneurs who actually used David Hornick as the VC. But and what I liked about what David said, something to the effect, it's a win-win. Like even if I give business away, I create an environment where other people can get deals. Because he would refer to other VCs where he thought he
Right.
wasn't the best one, and they get to build those relationships, and he gets to live in the world he wants to live in, of abundance, of helping others. So,
Right.
and contrast with, Ken Lay of Enron, and all the signals that they pointed to, the annual reports, like
Oh, yeah. The fact that he had to have a
full
full
page spread of
page.
just his picture.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That just, when
And
I
how
read that,
multiple
okay,
multiple
that
years of
is
annual reports, the picture got bigger or it was got a
right.
multi pages, comparing it to some other CEOs that were givers and they have a little thumbnail
Right.
picture or no picture in
Yeah.
the annual report. So yeah, I mean,
Well, and obviously Ken Lay is such a good story because it was such a train wreck by the time it all was said and done. But I thought it was really interesting that he referenced even prior to that, if you looked back at Ken Lay's career, as he moved up and went to different companies, he left behind a trail of wreckage of people that,
oh
were just couldn't stand working with him. I mean,
yeah,
he was a taker. He was the, huge narcissist. Obviously, it drove his personal success, but at a huge cost.
yeah,
Now, not knowing the guy, but I'm guessing he's the kind of guy that probably didn't care
right.
about the personal impacts. But in terms of a model of success, I think the rest of us would look at that and think, yeah, that cost is way too high. If that's what it takes to win, I don't think I want to play. And that actually was part of the reason why I wanted out of the corporate world when I finally left Sprint PCS, was that looking around at the other, senior executives, and I was at a VP level, but looking around at others that were like the next step or two up, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to
Right.
be those people.
Right.
They are constantly trying to undermine everybody else to make themselves look better. That's not the game I want to play.
Yeah.
And it works for some people, but it didn't work for me.
Yeah, I mean, and then he talks about Frank Lloyd Wright and how and Jonas Salk, how they were geniuses, but kind of going basically he made a distinction between geniuses who really were takers. They only cared about
Right.
themselves and
Right.
self promoting themselves and wouldn't give others credit, and genius makers, which are which elevate others people's capabilities and their genius. So it's and it reminded me of great sports players elevate everybody's game, right? But I'm a big Michael Jordan fan, but I mean, like, his famous or infamous Hall of Fame speech. I mean, he was still bitter at people.
Right.
You listen to that Hall of Fame speech. He goes after Jerry Krause again. The GM of the Bull. I mean, like, he
Yeah.
just people like, yeah, and everybody says, well, he got cut from his high school basketball team. Well, you know what? Michael Jordan never got cut from his high school basketball team. He was trying out for varsity as a sophomore, and he did not make varsity. So he
Right.
played JV, so he didn't get cut.
Yeah.
And like,
Well,
and
it
that.
sounds better the other way, though, right?
Oh yeah, like, yeah. I mean, but what I'm saying is that you're trying when Frank Lloyd Wright, I think the book gave an example. Like, he went 9 years and only built two homes because he
Because
moved.
nobody would work with him
Yeah, he
anymore.
moved away from his. He moved to somewhere in the backwoods of Wisconsin, and he didn't have his collaborators, even though he treated those people like shit and didn't give them any credit. He
Right.
would make them put his Frank Lloyd Wright's name on the drawings and things like that, even though they did the
No,
work.
they did the work. Right.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. And, how to identify these people as takers or matchers, and how to, how would you deal with them from how does a giver deal with a taker? So, talk
Right.
through all those things.
Yeah, so that yeah, I really did like some of the tips and that, hey, if you're going to be a giver, here's things to watch out for. And that's we talked about that earlier, the idea of, if you're sitting down in a networking session and you're meeting somebody and it's pretty clear that they are a taker. And sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't. But the key obviously as a giver is, you're willing to give that 5 minutes. You're willing to do a couple of introductions or help them out in some way.
Yeah.
But then when it's clear that they're not going to reciprocate, then you cut ties, you move on, you recognize
Right.
as quickly as you can, hey, this is a dry well. This is not somebody that's going to be helpful to me. And you don't need to be vindictive about it. You don't need
Right.
to, go out of your way, but just recognizing that somebody is at least has taker tendencies,
Right.
then that's enough to say, okay, yeah, I wasted an hour of my life here, but I'm not going to waste any more.
Right.
Where I think there are, when we talked about the selfless givers, that's the trap that they potentially fall into is they get taken advantage of, and then they can't say no the next time.
Right.
And that's where I think you really get into trouble. You have no idea until you've interacted with somebody what they're really like. And so I think you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but you recognize, hey, this is a one-way street and it's not working for me, so I'm just going to pull off and go a different
Right.
direction.
I think the book said, if you're a giver, you need to treat a taker like, and approach them as a matcher. So if
Right.
you give them something, but you need to get something back,
Right.
and if you're not, then, you have to move on. And, I also like the quote in there in the book saying something like, being a giver is not so good in 100-meter dash. It's good, but it's very good for a
It's great for a
marathon.
marathon.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, so you have to, it's the long game, which makes sense, right? It's just like sales, right? No one sells anything at the first time you meet a potential client, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, I guess it's possible, but usually not, right?
It
It's just
doesn't
like,
really work that way. Yeah. Well, and I think, and he referenced negotiations a few different times, and I've done a lot of kind of studying on different negotiation approaches and styles. But I think that's where a lot of this also really comes into play, because when you look at negotiations, if you're sitting across the table from a taker, and you can think of negotiations as more of a traditional, hey, I'm trying to haggle for the price of something, or it could be even a sales setting, or it could be something else. But once you recognize in a negotiation that, hey, I'm sitting across from a taker, that's where your point about, okay, I need to act like a matcher in a negotiation, especially if they're going to be aggressive and try to go after everything. Hey, I'm only willing to give you whatever it is you're asking for if you're going to give me something as well.
Right.
And so, applying that concept, I think makes a lot of sense and is really effective. On the flip side, being a giver in a negotiation enables you to be more creative. And he actually shares a story in there about when he was young and working in the corporate world. Adam Grant, I'm talking about,
Yes.
shares a story about how he had a sales negotiation that kind of, the buyer came back to him and said, "Hey, our budget's been slashed. We can't afford to do what we did last year." And Adam came back and said, "Well, you know what? There's got to be a way for both of us to win on this. What if we try something completely different?" And he suggested, a completely different approach as opposed to just buying advertising. He came up with a new model that ended up actually generating more revenue than it had the year before, but the company got more of what they wanted out of it. The client did. And so it was, a real win-win situation that wasn't just locked into, let's focus on the single price point.
Right. Yeah, that was a great example because I think he was doing it in college or right.
Right. Yeah. He was
And
like 19 or 20 years old,
yeah,
which is
and
pretty
he sucked
impressive.
at it. Like he
Right.
lost like the biggest clients that he was handed. Like he was like miserable. And I don't know who mentored him or did whatever, but yeah, he changed his whole approach and
Well, I think
started.
if I remember right, I think what he said in there, that kind of the turning point was that he realized that there were people that were counting on him. So other team members and other whoever benefited from whatever this company was, that they were the ones that were counting on the revenue. And so instead of just giving stuff away, which is where he got himself in trouble initially before he figured this out, he started to realize, well, I can't just give this away because then I'm going to get fired. My coworkers are going to get fired.
Right.
The company's going to go under if we don't start making money.
You're right.
And so,
Yes. Yeah, and that's the other great example of that. So when he started to think about my impact on others, that's
yeah,
when he became kind of an otherish giver,
right,
meaning like it's not just me, because it's easy to kind of lay down. He made the example of he had another gentleman that was a giver, and he also talked about females in terms of
right,
negotiation. They tend to be more givers, so they would like lay down. They wouldn't ask for as much money and things like that. And then that one gentleman that was mentioned, that his story was referenced, he started thinking about, well, I have a wife and two kids, like so I need to stand up for them. So
right. This isn't about me. I am their protector. Yeah,
right. They're counting on me to
yeah,
make as much money as possible, in a fair way, obviously, but yeah, I mean, and it makes a lot of sense in terms of
yeah. And it's
that.
it's great advice, and I've actually seen it referenced in other books as well. But just the concept of when you're in a tough negotiation and somebody's going after you, most of us are probably more likely, hey, if it's just about me, I'm not willing to go to bat just for myself, not a big deal. But if you were doing it on the behalf of a friend or on behalf of your family, automatically you're going to do more,
Right.
just because you are representing somebody else. And so when you're in a tough situation, think about, well, what would you tell a friend of yours if they were doing this?
Right.
And that probably is great advice, that you should take for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure negotiation is part of what you do to help your clients, but any other things from the book that you help your small to mid-sized business clients, use the principles or methods?
Yeah. I think the other big idea that this resonated with me that I've kind of been able to, and this builds on other books as well, but this one was certainly pretty central, is when you look at how to sell. So a lot of times you'll have a business owner or an entrepreneur that's great at what they do, but that doesn't mean they know how to sell. And so I think there's this stereotypical concept of the hardcore salesperson, right?
Yeah.
That is going to go out there and they can
Yep,
sell
Glenn
ice.
Gary, Glenn Ross, Boiler Room,
Right,
Wall
exactly.
Street, the Wolf of Wall Street.
And I've talked plenty of business owners that are clients of mine or just that I've talked to, in various settings, and that idea that they are going to be the Wolf of Wall Street or that they're going to be the guy in the boiler room that's, making a sales happen, it just doesn't fit, right? That's not
Right,
who they are. They don't have that skill set, they don't have that personality. And so then there's a sense of, well, I can't sell the way I think I'm supposed to sell, so I must suck at sales and I can't do anything. And I think this model, along with others that I talked about, but the idea of being a giver, the
right,
idea of adding value, educating, helping people, that can be a very powerful way to sell.
right,
And so the whole concept of using the powerless communication model as a way to influence people makes perfect sense to me now. I mean, it's something that I've learned, over my career, but the idea of asking questions and being curious and being genuinely concerned about, how would this work for you? That is so much more effective for most people than trying to be that hardcore, salesperson that just goes for the throat.
right.
And so
Yeah,
I think there's a huge lesson there of, hey, it's okay to just be curious and to ask questions and to say, hey, wouldn't this be helpful for you? As a way to get people to listen.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we're both fans of the Bob Berg and John David Mann book, The Go
Right.
Giver. So it's just,
Right.
it's a similar principle there. This is just steeped in data and
Right.
stories of givers and takers. So I love that. And Zig Ziglar said, and I won't try to impersonate Zig's accent, but you could have everything in life you want if you help enough people get what they want. So it's all Zig's a master at relationships and such. So
Yeah, and that quote actually reminds me. So my dad was a lifelong sales guy, and so I ended up going to college and getting an engineering degree, and so then I went into the corporate world and was with Accenture and consulting, and then ended up at Sprint as well. And so the first 10 or 15 years of my career, I didn't need to know how to network. I didn't need to know how to sell. I was just working, right? You're
right,
doing stuff in the corporate
yeah,
world. And so I would look at what my dad always did, and he was the kind of guy, he embodied that quote from Zig Ziglar. And in fact, I remember him when I was younger, he would say things like that, or he'd have different quotes.
nice, love it.
And I always, and when you're a 20 something, you're like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
you kind of
whatever,
roll
Dad.
your
Yeah,
eyes. And so I think I made his day one time when I was started doing this. I was writing a newsletter or something that I was a blog post and sent it out, and he read it and he's like, wow, so you discovered Zig Ziglar. And
yeah,
he just, kind of made his day that I had finally come around to his way of thinking. And I had. I mean, I much more appreciated his approach once I really understood kind of how it all played out. So yeah, it's funny how that kind of works sometimes. Or I'm just a really slow learner. That's probably the other lesson. So yeah, no, great book. And to your point, I think if there was going to be a knock on the book, and we talked about that a little bit the other day, that if there's a knock on the book, it may be that it's a little too general. I mean, it's a lot of great stories. I love the framework. I think there's a lot of valuable ideas in there, but it's not like it's a step-to-step guide of, okay, here's how you're going to be successful. It's more of a general overall recipe that I think
yeah. I mean,
uh,
the last chapter, it's small, but it gives you kind of steps, but it's not, yeah, you're right. It's not like a how-to for sure.
Which I think is fine. I'm not sure that a how-to, anything that was too prescriptive wouldn't work for everybody. It would work for some people, but not for others.
John, this has been a great discussion. I think we both love the book, obviously. Any closing thoughts?
If you want to try to make this a little more practical, adopt that 5-minute rule that basically says, hey, if you can help somebody out and it's going to take less than 5 minutes, just do that. It doesn't mean you have to go all out and, help everybody that you run across in a big way. You can make a lot of little impacts that make a big difference. And so I think that to me is probably, if I was going to take away one thing, that would probably be the biggest practical thing that you could take away. And then I think the other stuff that we already talked about, the idea of powerless communication as a way to look at sales, or the idea of how do you deal with takers or matchers, how do you deal with a matcher? Different ways of thinking about things in this framework can be really valuable. So I would definitely recommend people give it a shot and check it out.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't wait to read my next Adam Grant book, since this is the first one. So, Sean, thanks for coming on the Corporate Couch Special Edition. You've been great, and I look forward to our next book review.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of the Corporate Couch. If you enjoyed the episode, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me weekly, where I interview great leaders that share their career journey and their leadership wisdom.